Hello, bonjour, konnichiwa, marhaba, yakwe, and hola. Welcome to our virtual city life recap, where you're going to have the opportunity to learn from 19 different city departments on how they work and operate. You're going to have the opportunity to also see how you can get connected and make a difference within our community. So, if you're interested in also participating in an in-person event, we offer them in fall and also in the spring. You can find us at www.cityofdubuque.org/citylife. So without further ado, let's begin.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Dulcie, and I am the Chief of Police for the Dubuque Police Department. And you'll love my state-of-the-art Burger King drive-through headset. We were not ready for COVID, so we bought some really cheap webcams just so we can communicate on these conversations. And the webcam speakers and microphones are junk, so I had to go buy some Walmart headphones so I could have a conversation with you folks. So a little bit about myself. I've been with the Dubuque Police Department for 31 years now. It'll be 32 this fall, and I've been the chief for 11 years. Coming up through the department, did a little bit of everything. I was one of the original bicycle police, the community police officers, when we started the program in 1995. I then worked narcotics for a couple of years, went back to patrol as a supervisor, and eventually went over and supervised criminal investigation division for about 3 years before I was promoted to chief. So lots of experiences within the department, lots of community experiences. And one of the great things about this position is the opportunity to speak with our community members and talk about all the good things that go on in the city. City Life's a great opportunity to share some of that information. So this is really going to be a 10,000-foot view today. As Tim will answer, we do a Citizens Police Academy, and that's 10 weeks. So you're getting 10 weeks in about 50 minutes. So we'll see where that takes us. So for our department, we currently operate with 5 different patrol shifts. If you look at the left side of the screen, shifts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Shift 1 starts at 5 a.m. and goes till 3 p.m. Shift 2 goes from 9 a.m. till 7 p.m. Shift 3 is 3 in the afternoon till 1 a.m. Shift 4 is 7 at night till 5 in the morning, and shift 5 is 11 at night till 9 in the morning. And the reason why we have overlapping shifts is so there's always somebody on the street. It allows us to have, on a traditional shift, half people check out and go home, and then the other ones come in and check in. So you kind of have that dead time. So by having this overlap between every shift, there's always somebody that's out available to respond to calls for service. Our patrol shift works 4 10-hour days, and we've been doing that for about 15 years now, maybe a little bit more. And our officers love that, the fact that they have a 3-day weekend helps them get away from here and kind of decompress a little bit. Next to the patrol division is COP, or Community Oriented Policing, what was traditionally known as the bicycle police, but it also contains our crime prevention, our public information officer, our school resource officers. So it's got a little bit of finger into everything. Next to that is CID, or Criminal Investigation Division. So it's a captain, a lieutenant that assists him in general crime, and then a lieutenant that's assigned to the Dubuque Drug Task Force, and then the officers. So they handle pretty much all of the major investigations, pretty much any death investigation short of, a very obvious natural death. They will respond to murders, suicides, anything that looks suspicious, all sexual assaults, some of the felony level financial crimes, a little bit of everything. The big thing is if it's going to take up a lot of extra time that the officers can't spend to do the response, it's going to go to the investigators. And then the Staff Bureau is the Training Office of Professional Standards, also known as Internal Affairs, the corporals, officers, civilian staff, and that type of, all the other folks like me. So a little bit about the city. We have 7 patrol territories that are staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So if you look at to the right center, 101, that's the downtown, just to give you a little bit of an idea where you're at. And then we'll go counterclockwise. 102, what would traditionally be known as the Point. 103, traditionally known as the North End. 107, if you want to picture the greater Wahlert High School area. 104 is that large monolith to the left. That's pretty much everything west of Asbury Road. 106 we would call the College District, and 105 is the South Hill, which is pretty much everything south of Dodge Street. So you see we have 7 territories. That wasn't always the case. We had 6 territories for the longest time. Territory 107 is a relatively new creation. We started that about 10 years ago. And if you see 104 on the left side, how jagged that is, that's because we keep annexing in additional land into the city. As we need place to grow for our houses and our industry, we keep annexing in land. But that continued to grow, that it was far too unmanageable for one officer to cover during their shift. So we took a piece of that and a piece of 103, the north end, and cut it off and made 107. So it's quite a bit of a cut down for that territory that we gave up. But if you look at the little orange block to the right of the screen, we added 6 square miles, actually 7, over that 20-year period. Difference between then and now, there's really not a lot left to annex. We're competing with Asbury for a lot of land. We're competing with Sageville to the north of us off of Highway 52. Can't go further east, we'll hit the river. But if you look towards the bottom center, you see the word Southwest Arterial. I don't know if you'll see my mouse if I move it on screen, probably not. The word Southwest Arterial, that was recently opened. That connects Highway 20 to Highway 151, 61 on the south side of the county. The white area is Dubuque County. So you see the north end of Southwest Arterial is in the city, and the south end is in the city. Everything else is in the county. So that white area could eventually become the city. Where the Northwest Arterial currently was at one time white box like that too, and we slowly annexed in all the land. So as that Southwest Arterial develops, we continue to see the city to annex in some land, and if we take in that whole entire area, there will probably be territory 108 will have to get added because it's not manageable by the number of cars that we have. A little bit about our staffing. We are currently authorized 112 sworn staff. Boy, my graphics at the top of the slide didn't translate real well. So I'm authorized 112 officers. That's everything from me down to the newest officer that we hire. So where we're at right now, I have 94 officers that are ready to go, 11 vacancies, soon to be 12 and potentially 13. I have 3 in the training or in the law enforcement academy. Actually, they graduated Wednesday. And then I had 4 in the field training program. So if I take that 11 vacancies plus 3 in the training or 3 in the academy and 4 in the training program, that's actually 18 officers that I'm down because they don't count. I can't use them in a full capacity if they're not fully trained. So I'm down 18 officers this time right now. And like I said, I'm going to lose one. She's currently retiring, but she's taking vacation for the last month or so. So then she'll be 12 vacancies. And we just received word that one of our officers is a finalist in another department. So each of those hurt a little bit because generally they come from patrol and they have to, again, go through the law enforcement academy or the field training program. It takes about a year from the time we hire them until the time they hit the street on solo patrol. So anybody I lose in that year just keeps adding to the deficit. Very challenging time for us right now, trying to get those numbers back up. Here's one of the other concerning pieces for us. This is our current hiring trend. If you look at the blue line at the top, that's the number of people that actually sign up to take the test. We never get everybody to show up. But you look at back in 2012, we had 289, almost 300 people, so we're fairly consistently in that 100 to 150 plus over a number of years. Then you go to the far right of the screen and we were at 68 this year. We only had 68 people signed up to take it. The orange line in the middle is those that have passed everything. So generally we can handle interview background or processing of about 50 to 60 people. So those years where we had 112 people that passed everything, only about half of them made it to the next round based on their test scores. But then we started doing more and more. But again, you go to the right side of the screen, 14 people passed. And then the gray line on the bottom, by Iowa code, I can certify a list of 40 candidates for the position. So you look at 2010 through 2014, I hit that state maximum of 40. And then we had a little dip for a year down to 34. Then we were back up to 40. And then you just look at the way it bounces around the last few years until we get down to 2021. And I had a final certified list of 10 people. Now, if you remember that last slide, I'm already at 11 vacancies, soon to be 13. I don't even have enough people that pass the test that even if everybody was a rock star that I wanted to hire, I wouldn't have enough. So we're going to be retesting in the fall. Traditionally, we only test once a year. This will be the first time ever that we've had a test twice in a year. This is the trend going on in society right now. All my peers in Iowa are this way. Talked to up here in Appleton, Wisconsin last week. They're going through the same situation. It's just incredibly challenging to recruit officers to this business these days. Just as an example of the age of my department, this is everybody in the office right now, minus the 3 that are soon to be hired. So just to give you an example of how old everybody is. Those in blue have 10 years or less experience, and those in red have 5 years or less experience. So I have a very young department, and as I said, I've been chief for 11 years, and not everybody's stays and people come and go, but I've hired about 80 people out of 112 authorized strength. So we've had a lot of changes over that time. We're going to continue to be young. The way our retirement system works, we go in waves, and we are at the start of a next wave of retirements, including many supervisors are due to retire in the next 5 years. So we're going to continue to be a young department for the foreseeable future. We are an accredited agency. We were the first agency accredited in Iowa and therefore the longest accredited agency. We've been in since 1993. Through that process, we have to adhere to 484 standards of accreditation. It requires us to maintain files showing that we have written documentation, which is usually policy or code. And then we have to have proof of compliance. And that's everything from reports to videos to photos, all kinds of standards, from everything on how to set up your cars through search and seizure and arrest and other issues like that. It's a very time-consuming process. There's actually a person that does this full time for us. And it's a very involved process, but it gives us the best possible standards to meet when it comes to law enforcement. So our calls for service, traditionally we see about 55,000 calls for service a year. Peaks and valleys as different trends happen, but been fairly standard for the last decade or so. You'll see a slight decrease. Fiscal year 20, we saw about a 4% decrease in our calls for service, so about 2,250 calls. And as we go back and dissect the calls for service at the end of the year, we try to figure out what happened. And what we think probably happened is during the early stages of COVID, the city did not enforce parking violations. We encouraged our officers to be very limited on their traffic stops and contacts with individuals because we weren't quite sure what COVID was doing and how easily transmittable it was. Many businesses were shut down, especially all the licensed liquor establishments. So if we didn't have licensed liquor establishments, we had less bar fights, we had less drunk drivers. Retail was closed, so we had less shoplifters. So it all led to a reduction in our calls for service. But when we do get our calls for service, it's when we start looking at what are the crime trends. So whenever you hear about crime trends in the United States, in the United States, they're talking about the Part 1 crimes. And that's just how the FBI classifies them. Part 1 crimes. Top of the chart is person crimes, bottom of the chart is property crimes. So whether it's CNN or Fox News, whatever you're listening to, and they talk about, the U.S. crime trends are showing this and murder rates are showing this, they're referring to the FBI Uniform Crime Report, and that's where we send this data. So when we look at, oh my, I got the wrong chart in here. I'm sorry. I didn't update this slide. There it is. Okay, same spiel that I just did, but with proper information, much better. So when we look at this across the top of the line, anything in yellow is our high year. So calendar year 20, which is January through December 2020, 267 in the yellow box. That was our high year in person crimes. That was very disheartening for us because we had 4 years of decreases in crime. Overall, if you look down to the bottom line on the right side of the blue columns, we had a 0.2% increase in total Part 1 crimes after 4 years of decreases. Our person crimes went up 77, and our property crimes went down 74. So we had a net of 3 crimes. So 3 different little things could have changed us and kept our trend going down. But inevitably, we knew it was going to shift, so we have to look at it. So when we start dissecting that, we look at our murders. We average about 1 a year. We've already had our one for 2021, so we just certainly don't need it anymore. We start looking at things like sexual assault. So when we get the raw numbers, then we start digging into those. And for sexual assault, we know that 57% of our sexual assault crimes were age-related. Iowa has certain statutory limits where people can consent to sexual assault or sexual contact, and if not, it's a violation of the law. So 57% are age-related. And we know of all 105 of those, 91% are situations where the victim and the suspect were known to one another. And the reason why I bring that up is when we talk about sexual assault, so many of the SVU and CSI, those shows, it's the stranger, it's the abductions. The reality is that it's people that know each other. And when you start looking at age-related offenses, unfortunately, it's people that know each other too closely. It's family members, it's friends and family. So we run into situations like that. So it's very challenging crime. That's why we have a specialist in criminal investigations that run the majority of those calls for us. Another area where we saw a big increase was aggravated assaults. We saw a 58% increase, almost 59% increase. And when we started looking at those, some of the things we noticed is that our domestic assaults were up 13%. So if we start thinking about it from the COVID point of view, we had people that were locked in their houses for weeks and months. Quite frankly, I think a lot of people just had enough of each other, and anything that was an underlying issue boiled to the top, and we had more situations of domestic violence. We also saw, again, we lost the bar fights and stuff because of that, but we saw once we had periods where things started to loosen up and people were getting out, we started seeing upticks immediately and some of our crimes like that. So overall, as we look at things, yes, we had a 0.2% increase that broke our trend of 4 years of decreases. But overall, I think it's a situation that shows that Dubuque is still a safe community. One of the other big hot topics is shots fired. And the way we track this, and it's very consistent across Iowa, is we track confirmed shots fired. We don't consider it a confirmed shots fired just because somebody called it in that way, because we know there are so many mistaken reports and false reports. You would not believe how many calls of shots fired we get around July 3rd. They're definitely not shots fired. You can tell by the sparkly stuff blowing up in the sky. But it is something that we do track closely. Last year, we had 17 shots fired. That was an increase of 1 from the prior year, or a 6% increase. So with my peers in Iowa, we compare and contrast a lot of notes. We were doing this for a while. This year, I spread out a little bit further and started checking the western side of the state with Sioux City and Council Bluffs and the capital in Des Moines, and then started looking at Rockford and Peoria, who aren't too far away from us, to see what we were finding. And you can see just based on the raw numbers, there's just been a rash of shots fired cases in this Midwest part of the country. And folks will say, you can't compare these cities to Dubuque, they're way bigger. Okay, well, Cedar Rapids is about 1.5 times our size. So even if you take our 17 and multiply it by 1.5, or Davenport 1.5, or any of these cities, Rockford, Peoria, if you figure out the math, how much bigger they are, we don't even come close to touching those cities. So they're very alarmed by what they're seeing, and they're working hard at it. But it's an incredibly challenging case to investigate. Usually a shots fired incident is quick, 5 seconds or less, and then the people are gone, especially if they're using cars to do drive-by type shootings. So car pulls up, shoot shots, it's gone. And police have little to go on. Victims might know and they're not cooperating, witnesses aren't cooperating. It really makes for a challenge. What's been one of the biggest things for us to resolve a lot of the shots fired cases is our city camera array. If you're not aware, but we have about 1,000 cameras in the city in street intersections. About half of them are in parking facilities and parking ramps. So we have about 500 street level cameras that we can tap into. We've caught many shots fired on video. And even if we don't actually capture the incident, we can track cars until we can eventually get a license plate and trace them back to their houses, catch them before they get there. So we've been able to resolve a lot of shots fired calls because of our city camera array. And most of the cities that you see on that chart have come to Dubuque to look at our camera system, and they're extremely jealous of us. And we're starting to see some of these other cities are picking up the trend and doing the same thing. So what do we do? This is one of the things, I don't recall what year I did this slide from to pull this data, and it was quite extensive research to do the data, so I just keep using it, but it's pretty consistent. When we look at our things, 56,000 calls for service a year. We do about 12,000 traffic issues. This is everything from traffic stops, roadway hazards, special enforcement projects, motorist assist, citizens requests for extra services, all kinds of things related to traffic. 5,600 disturbances. This is everything from verbal disturbances, physical disturbances, cold disturbances, domestics, disputes, everything right down the line. Fire and ambulance. We respond to every fire call and most ambulance calls, and then everything from wires down to gas spills to full-on blazes. Excuse me. Long and short of it is, our officers are out and about, and oftentimes are a lot closer to the locations when they happen. So the fire department has to get paged out from the related houses. So it might take them a few minutes to get there. So oftentimes we're there doing some of the early steps. Sometimes it's simple as blocking traffic. Other times it's to get into CPR. Happens quite often. It's helping evacuate the houses. It's whatever's necessary. So we spend quite a bit of our time on the fire calls. Other big one is parking. If you look at that, almost as many parking complaints as fire and ambulance assist. And part of that is everything from street storages to blocked alleys to that type of stuff. People are very territorial about their parking. If a lot of people think that the street right in front of their house is theirs and theirs alone, and they can call on any type of issue that's out there. No, it is still a city street. Yes, you might have a disabled parking placard in front of your house, but that is not your spot. Anybody that has a proper placard can park there. One of the big things we see is our winter parking issues. Every year we have at least one situation where people will come to blows over a parking spot. And I think we can all understand that frustration. If I'm out in 30-degree weather or 30 below weather, digging for 2 hours to get my car out, and I run to the gas station to fill it up, and some idiot parks in my spot, yeah, I'm probably going to want to bury his car in snow or take the shovel to his head. And it happens every single year. We get some of those disturbances. Accidents, separate from the traffic issues, we respond to a lot of accidents. Fortunately, most of them are damage to property only. One of the trends we're seeing is a lot more injury accidents. We're not quite sure the trends, and one of the things that a lot of us think is probably related to it is the use of handheld devices, cell phones basically. We know there's a lot of people that are texting and they're not paying attention, so they're moving along at a pretty good clip, and we're getting in quite a few accidents that way. And then just general assistance calls, everything from citizen assist to warrant services, suspicious vehicles, found property, animal calls. Yes, we go to barking dog and dogs that are pooping in parks. We get all those calls. Alarms, property issues, property disputes, all kinds of things. And that does not include that there's still an additional 8,400 out of that 55,000 that fit into other categories. So when we talk about the relations with police and the community members, and even this term is one that I try to avoid anymore. It's one that we've used forever as citizens, and that terminology has become kind of divisive in itself. So I prefer the word community members, but there's definitely a divide between police and community members. And as we look at things and try to make things better in Dubuque, we look at what are some ways we do it. And one of the easiest things that we found is this was the, you ever saw this movie RoboCop, mid to late 80s? He had three directives: serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. And if you know the movie, there was a fourth classified one that doesn't come out until later in the movie. It's kind of the plot. But the thing about it is, this is what the law enforcement academy trains. They train people to go in, serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. Read the black and white code book, follow the law, get there, get the facts, move on to the next situation, protect your butt, do everything officer safety in mind. It is definitely a situation where these, and I can call them kids now because my kids are that age. I'm getting that age myself. But these kids are coming in and they might have been the most friendliest person in the world, but after 15, 16 weeks of academy training, they get an armor built around them. And it's important that they have the armor, but there's a time when they can let the armor down. So we have to spend our time during our field training program kind of deprogramming them a little bit and saying, you know, not everybody's out to mess with you. Not everybody's out to get you. The majority of people are supportive of you and they want to help you do your job and they want to be protected by you. But realistically, it takes a good 5 years for an officer to be able to have that ability to bounce between conversations and shed that armor completely. So it's quite the challenge, but we need that foundational armor in place from the academy to train our officers so they are protected and they can do the job and do it effectively. But then we spend the rest of their career fine-tuning them. So talk a little bit about oversight. When it comes to law enforcement, nobody has as much oversight, or excuse me, when it comes to careers, especially within the city organization and in government, nobody has the layers of oversight that law enforcement does. And when I talk about the layers of oversight, I often use the analogy, you know, how many of you have ever gone to a restaurant and had a bad meal? And I would wager that every one of you have had that at least once. Have you complained? Did you tell the manager, you know, this service is really bad, my hamburger was raw, my steak was overcooked, whatever? Absolutely. Most of us have. I know I have. But the difference is, if you're being mistreated or you think you're being mistreated by a civil servant or a city employee, it's surprising how many people don't complain. And that goes for law enforcement, that goes for TEMWA, it goes for anybody within the city organization. It's amazing how many people will get angry about burnt French fries, but they won't get angry when somebody violates their public trust. To that end, we have these layers of oversight for us. And it might be kind of hard to see on your screen, so I'll go through them a little bit. At the smallest circle at the bottom is the on-duty supervisor. We have 24-hour-a-day supervision in this building. So we have somebody that can field the calls, and they get a ton of them. Everything from your officer was rude to your car went through a yellow light, you name it. They come in and they have to deal with those. The next level up is internal affairs. It's a process that a lot of calls will go there and they might get redirected back to direct supervisors to handle. But if it's anything serious, our internal affairs function is going to take care of it. They'll do an investigation on an officer. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of those every year, but we have enough that we have a full-time position staff in internal affairs. They have other duties too, but we do have somebody that takes care of that. Administration, that's me, the assistant chief. In a city the size of Dubuque, it is nothing for somebody to immediately call the police chief and go right to the police chief, right to the city manager, right to the next layer, City Hall. They'll go to the mayor. You know, one of the best things you love to hear, the mayor is my personal friend and I'm going to have him look into this. It's like, all right, go for it. You know, but it can go right to there. The next layer up is DCAP, formerly Dubuque Community Advisory Panel, currently known as Dubuque Community Police Relations Committee. This was an entity started in 1993 via memorandum of understanding between the Dubuque Police Department and the NAACP. And it's another community-led panel that can hear complaints about officers and offer recommendations for changes within the department. Next level up is human rights. We do have a human rights department, which Tim was a part of, but our local human rights department will not hear cases against other city staff because they are actually city employees, so they can refer to the state's Human Rights Commission, and that happens too. And then the next layer up is Department of Justice in the courts. We can be sued, we can have people complain to the Department of Justice. Some people might make that call to the supervisor and be happy with the resolution. And we've got people that have used every rung on this circle. And each one, they might have been told, nope, 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 nope. But they keep going until they've worn out every possible remedy for them. And some of it is important. You know, I've always said I'd rather have somebody complain and have it turn out to be nothing than have them sit back and wallow in the misery or tell their friends how they were mistreated. I'd rather look at any complaint and see what we can do with it. But some of it's important too. You know, excuse me, too much talking today. It's important that we have details. You know, I can have somebody that can call into me and say, your department sucks, and hangs up on me. Well, that does nothing for me. You know, if you call in and say, I was stopped Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. at 3rd and Main, I thought your officer was being rude. That's incredibly easy for me to backtrack and figure out what was going on. It's the same as you calling in, you know, to Microsoft and saying, your product sucks. You know, I heard you talking about some computer issues earlier. Calling Microsoft and telling them their product sucks doesn't help them troubleshoot things. Talking to people about how an update did something or some mechanical issue, that's what's important. So that's why I always encourage people, please feel free to call and complain, but give me details. Just don't give me an open-ended, you guys suck. So where does it come together? And where do we see clashes and where do we see positivity? So the blue circle, we have the police officer. He has his duties to perform. We expect her to go out and work 10 hours of her shift. We expect them to go out and do everything, their entire shift. And so they know what they have to do. They have to respond to calls. They're supposed to be alert while they're doing things. And one of the things about it is, if a citizen calls, we don't have a choice. If it's something appropriate, we have to respond to it. So we have the duties. Then we have the resident foundation. What is the resident's background? Have they had bad relationships with the police before? Are they drunk? Are they intoxicated? Have they been fighting with their spouse? Are they a karate expert? You know, what's the situation? Then we have the officer foundation. Did the officer just get chewed out by a supervisor? Does the officer have a bad experience in that neighborhood or with that particular family? What's going on? And then you throw in things like environment. What is the environment? Is it in a public place? Is it in a park? Is it on a city street? Is it at the individual's home? You know, most people view their home as their own castle, so they're expecting different levels of treatment. So when all these come together is when we see the clash between the officers and community members. So we have to start looking at these and trying to manage these as much as we can. Environment, we're never going to be able to control to a great extent. Resident foundation, we can't control to a great extent. Duties are still going to be there. So what I need to work on is my officers. I need to find out what their viewpoints are and and make sure they understand what is allowable, what is acceptable, and what the levels and standards are going to be held to. Some opportunities to learn. Citizens Police Academy, as Temwa mentioned. We had the Police Academy last year. I think it was the 25th year that we had it, maybe the 26th. And then this thing called COVID hit. I think we were probably about 3/4 of the way through it when it hit, and we had to shut it down. It's a 10-week program where we have people learn everything from the hiring process, use of force, laws of arrest. We usually bring in the canines for some demonstrations. We usually bring in the tactical team for everybody to take a look at the equipment. The school resource officers is just to give you a greater understanding of the way the police operates. With COVID still in place, we couldn't do it again this year. I think we're all hoping that life gets back to some normalcy, but I'm hoping we're back into doing it again in future years. A ride-along program, anybody can do one 4-hour ride at least once a year, maximum once a year, I'm sorry. So if you ever have the inclination, you can stop down to the police window, or you can check out our website and you can take a look. There's a form you have to fill out. You can pick your shift if you're looking for just to get a general idea. Sunday afternoon on shift 1 might give you an idea of just what's in the squad car. If you want to see something a little exciting, you probably want to work on a Friday or Saturday night at 11 o'clock, do a ride along, and you're going to see a lot more. Our Explorer program is something that we started my first year as chief. And this is a program through the Boy Scouts of America, now known as Scouting America. But while Boy Scouts was traditionally for boys only, Explorers has always been a program for boys and girls age 14 to 21. So this was a program. They have lots of Explorer programs. There's an Explorer program at John Deere for future engineers. There's all kinds of Explorer programs for kids to start learning more about what they're doing. Some do it year round. We do it during the school year. But the idea being, you saw my recruitment numbers a few slides ago. We predicted this trend some time ago, and we recognize that we have to grow our own future police officers. So we started with these kids, some in middle school and high school, and we guide them through that. Kind of like proud parents, push them off to college, and then when they come back, we hopefully get them in as intern and then hire them. So we've already hired several of our kids that started out as Explorers. It's been a good program for us. Hopefully we're going to continue to be able to expand that. And then our internships, we've had traditional internships for years, and some of those have included simple things like a police ride-along. A lot of schools will say you have to do so many hours riding with your whatever department you work for, and that's good. It's fine. We handle a few of those a year. But again, a program I started when I became chief was our Community Resource Officer program. And that's actually a paid internship where they're in a modified uniform and they do police work. We actually begin training them on what their role would be as a police officer, basics of report writing, that type of stuff. And it's been tremendously successful for us. Again, last year we had to cancel it. So in the 9 years that we had the program, I've gone on to hire over 60% of my community resource officers. So it's been a great tool for us for that. And it's also been a great tool to diversify our department. We are very open and with the fact that we wish to hire women and minority candidates as our community resource officers, give them a taste of what it's like to be a police officer with the Dubuque Police Department, send them back for their senior year of college, and then hire them the next year. And it's worked out really well for us. So again, we didn't have our CRO program last year, so we have 6 of them signed up for this summer. That'll be starting pretty quick, which will be great because then I hope to see these kids back next year or the year after, signed up to take the test to become police officers. So that's it. As I said, it's a 10,000-foot view. Our Citizens Academy is 10 weeks covering all these facets and more. So I would encourage you, if you enjoy your city life experience, that probably the end of this calendar year or first part of next calendar year, you'll start seeing advertisements for the Citizens Police Academy. If you're on social media, we'll blast it all over our social media. In the past, I think we've kind of done a little bit of trading back and forth. I know I've definitely promoted the city life to Citizens Police Academy. I think we've had a few, Tim, haven't we, that bounce back and forth between both programs, and vice versa. So, I think that anybody that ever wants to learn more about their city, both these programs are great for them. So that's it. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll gladly take any questions that anybody has. It doesn't necessarily have to be what was in the conversation, but if you have some other conversations you'd like to discuss, I'm all ears, and it's your opportunity to stump the chump, see what you can get by the chief.
I have a question. I read the law enforcement log in the Telegraph Herald every day, and I noticed that a lot of arrests are made at the law enforcement center. What is that, and why are so many arrests there rather than where they catch the person?
A lot of them are probably warrant arrests. So, if somebody does something wrong, especially with our investigators, they interview somebody and the person admits, yeah, I did it. They said, okay, there's going to be an arrest warrant coming from you, and I'll let you know when to turn yourself in. And they'll call them and say, hey, the warrant's out, come turn yourself in. The other situation we'll have is you get to know people. Even the relationship between the police and the bad guys, some of the real bad guys, they can call them if they know. We have their phone numbers from past dealings. We'll call them and say, hey, Bill, you got an arrest warrant. Why don't you take care of it now yourself? You get yourself turned in, you can see the judge right away, rather than on a Friday night when you might have to sit for 24 hours until you can see the judge. It's a thing of convenience. And there's a lot of arrests that happen, somebody's already sitting in jail. So we have somebody that gets arrested for a forgery or something, and then a new forgery is developed through the investigation. So they might actually be just a constant cycle of additional charges.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I find it interesting that those, it seems like the two categories of crimes that I see most often in the log are domestic assault and drug stuff, either the drugs themselves or theft, which is probably drug related.
A lot of our theft and a lot of our car burglaries and a lot of those things are drug related. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a scourge.
I do have a question, but first I just wanted to give a shout out to your community police officers as well as your SROs, because I'm a new faculty member in the criminal justice program at Loras College, and I've had the opportunity to have some of your officers speak with my students. So it's been a great experience for my students as well as myself.
Thank you.
And my question was partially for me and for my students as well. I was kind of curious about the challenges to recruitment with the Dubuque PD. Is it a problem on the supply side or the demand side?
Yes. Both. And we go in cycles. And like I said, with our, we'll lose people 5 at a time just because they were hired in the same clumps. So we start losing people in clumps. One of the things that we know hurt us last year was the fact that we weren't able to go actively recruit. There were no job fairs, there were no career fairs. We have a footprint on the Loras campus, we have a footprint on the University of Dubuque campus. There was no kids there for a lot of the year. So we lost a lot of our recruitment. Even little things like we tested in February, the vaccinations were just getting out. People weren't sure if they wanted to travel to Dubuque and take a test. I think it was the stars and the moons aligned in a negative way for us last year. But if you remember that trend line, it was going down anyways. We're going to test again in the fall. I'm hoping we have better luck. But you also have to look at what's going on the political landscape right now. It's not a good time to be a police officer. It's just not a good time. And what we see a lot of times when usually the economy impacts our recruitment too, and when the economy is good, we see less candidates. But what we see both with the economy and with the social settings of what's going on right now, the kids that are getting into it know what they're getting into it. When the economy is poor and when things are hunky-dory around the country, you get somebody that worked in a factory and just said, you know, I'm tired of being a factory. I think I want to go be a police officer. They have no foundation, no background, and maybe they got a ton of life experience, but they're going with somebody that has, since middle school, as a police explorer, they've made it their life's ambition to be a police officer. So they know the good and the bad about it. So we don't always get the quantity, but maybe we get a little bit better quality when times are challenging. But we're competing with every police department in the Midwest.
Great question.
Hi there. Oh, yep, I had a question. One I wanted to say, I have seen, I don't know if it's always the same bike police officer, but I'm a part of the North End Neighborhood Association, and there is someone that does come, and I really do appreciate that, getting input of what's going on in our neighborhood, and then he does listen to concerns and gives us feedback, and then also says, well, that's not something we can really do, like putting a a speed bump on White Street. Like that's not something that can be done, but it's really good to have that feedback. So I do appreciate that. I wanted to say that first. My question is, actually, I have two questions. The first one is, what is the Dubuque Police Department doing to make sure that what's happened to so many people of color won't happen to anyone here in Dubuque? I know that that's a big question, and just any kind of feedback that you can provide would be great.
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. First of all, you know, in the most pure sense of what we're doing, it has to come down to training. And one of the big things we've been pounding on for the last several years is de-escalation, making sure that we're doing what we can to lessen our impact on the situation. And also, I think everything is just an eye opener for the officers as they watch what's going on around the country. And nobody wants to be that guy that gets caught up in something like that. So I think using our best training, our best de-escalation skills, brain health awareness is incredibly important as we're moving forward. So it all comes down to training. But ultimately, you know, in the split-second decisions that have to be made, sometimes it's not going to look great from the public viewpoint, but it is legally going to be the right thing that had to be done. So that makes for an incredible challenge. And this is not to belittle it in any manner, but when you ask people how many people are killed by police officers every year, you get some very interesting numbers, especially when you start getting into minority and traditionally marginalized communities. If you go into some communities and say, how many black people are killed by police every year? And you'll hear, you know, 5,000, 10,000, you know, all these different numbers, and then across the spectrum. And the reality is, through firearms, and the Washington Post tracks this incident by incident, and you can break it down by year, by race, by gender, by all these things. There's about 1,000 people that die from police gunfire every year, 1,000. And of that, 80%, the person that got shot was armed with a gun or a knife. It's like 67% guns, 13% knives. 80% are armed adversarial situations with police. And then you look at all the different variables that go into that. There's just a lot that doesn't get unpacked when we're dealing with this on the national level. Unfortunately, we get so caught up in the rhetoric. And again, this is not to minimize any of these incidents. Any one death is one too many. It's a tragic situation, but we get so lost in the debate that we don't look at the facts. And it makes for a very challenging time for police officers to try to explain, you know, I've been to Minneapolis, but I've never been to some of these other cities where this has happened. I can't speak to what happens in these cities. Is there some issues? Absolutely. Every department has some people that are knuckleheads. But does anybody go to work with the desire to kill somebody? No. And when I mentioned earlier about our duties, the police don't want to go to these calls. They don't want to go to the store where the guy passed a fake $20 bill. They don't want to deal with the guy that's selling loose cigarettes on New York City streets. They don't want to deal with the guy in Atlanta that was selling his homemade CDs out of the Quickie Mart. They don't want to, but the businesses are calling and demanding action take place. Down in Columbus, they don't want to dispute or go into disputes between teenage girls, and then one pulls a knife. They prefer not to deal with that, but the call is made and they're going to respond.
I'm new to your town, our town, and I'm wondering, is the jail part of the police or part of the sheriff, part of the county or the city? And is it also part of the Citizens Academy whenever that may open up again?
The jail is owned by Dubuque County, and the sheriffs in Iowa are charged with operating the county, or the jails in the county. So it's kind of a unique situation. And in my building, I'm actually a tenant. The sheriff owns my building as well. I lease space from him, and it's been that way since 1974. But they operate it, and depending on how things are going during the Citizens Academy, they will do jail tours as part of that.
Cool. I've done that before in two other places. and greatly enjoyed it.
Tim, what time?
Oh, you're good.
Okay.
Also, part of this presentation, if you choose, though, you can get tased or maced.
We allow pepper spray, but we don't tase anybody. We don't carry tasers, but we usually get about a half a dozen volunteers that get pepper sprayed. Some people are glad they did it, and other people say that was the dumbest thing I've ever done.
I've been dumb already. I don't need to do that one.
Yeah, that's for us to carry it. We have to experience it, and I don't think I'd carry it if I had a choice.
Well, reporting live from currently Columbus, Ohio. I won't necessarily comment on my experience with tear gas or not, but what I wanted to say was thank you for your accessibility and thank you for being here. Because again, I'm new to the Dubuque community and I'm really impressed with everything that I've seen so far. And currently, I am sitting at my hometown in Columbus, Ohio, where things are different. And I think if I could just bring anything to the conversation from that perspective, I think that the thing that makes that happen here is that certain neighborhoods have been deemed unsafe, and they've been deemed that, generally speaking, along lines that included redlining lines and then reinforcement of segregation. And so, I think just, again, the perspective from my perspective is that having spent a limited time in Dubuque, but there's no quote unquote bad neighborhoods there. There just aren't, and I don't know what the local perceptions are, but there just aren't bad neighborhoods there. And I hope that that's the perception with the police department and with everybody that interacts in the city. That's just my perspective.
It's great comments, and as Kathy alluded to, being in the North End Neighborhood Association, there's certain parts of the city, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder, let's put it that way. And there are people that will say the downtown is a crime-ridden, horrible place, and I will never go there. Yet they're down there every weekend for farmers market. They go down to Mario's and have a panzerotti, or they go to Marco's and pick up a pizza. And you throw it back in the face. Well, that's different, But I would never go to Comiskey Park. Well, you go past Comiskey Park, there's dozens of kids playing soccer and basketball, and little kids on the playground equipment. And I 100% agree with you, Andrew. When I have visitors that come to town, as I mentioned earlier, we're accredited. When we have these accredited assessors that come in, and they're generally from larger cities, and I'll take them on a personal tour, and I'll drive through the Washington neighborhood, and then I'll go up through the North End, then I'll come down Bluff Street and through Locust, and I'll say, so what do you think of this neighborhood? And they're like, oh, I love those old workman houses, and it's beautiful, and the trees and the foliage incredible. And I said, oh, that's my slums, that's my ghetto. And they just laugh, and they're like, oh my God, are you serious? But it really is, it's a thing about perception. And there's a community group that I work with regularly. It's called the Cheese Forum. It's an internal group. But one of the things we were working on before COVID hit, what can we do about that reputation that the downtown is unsafe? And it has to come from the people that live there. And no neighborhood is perfect. I've got some little burglars in my neighborhood right now that if I ever catch a little shit, I'm going to throttle them. But the fact is, every neighborhood has things like that. And it's the reputation of the people that aren't there that deem it that way. So you talk to people that live in the North End, yeah, there's warts, but they love their neighborhoods. The people that live in the downtown, especially Jackson Park, had such a bad reputation for a while. The people that live down there love that park. That's their benchmark for them, is keeping that beautiful. So it's all beauty in the eye of the beholder. But no, people ask me what's a safe part of the city. I said everything that's surrounded by the border.
Well, I appreciate that, and I chose to live right downtown on 4th and Bluff. So, anytime you're doing those tours down there, I'd be happy to provide whatever insight I can provide.
Sounds good.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated the RoboCop reference and to the directive, serve the public, trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. If memory serves, Directive 4 is never oppose an OCP officer. what kind of you relating that to police community relations was really touching to me, because that's kind of the main themes in my criminal justice courses, is that dealing with crime, solving crime uh, isn't a police issue alone. It takes the police and the community working together to do that. And related back to the opportunities to learn slide that you showed, in addition to the Citizens Police Academy, does Dubuque also offer a police auxiliary or a police reserve program like some other cities do?
Yeah, we have what's called the Dubuque Auxiliary Police. The reserve is different. That's they have to meet certain training standards in Iowa. It's a whole different can of worms. We have a volunteer group called the Dubuque Auxiliary Police, and it's 40-ish people that belong to it, and they are lifesavers for us. They don't get any glamorous duty. They work the parade routes, help shut off side streets. If we had a huge fire up on Clark Drive here a few weeks ago, they staff the barricades for us. And they give us thousands of hours every year that if we didn't have them, it would be officers doing that. So they're a tremendous group. I was actually a member from 1987 till 1989. So I have a very big soft spot for that entity in my heart.
Mark, I was wondering, you said that there was two parts to the question that I had asked. One was training, and I do appreciate that you're talking about de-escalation. Was there another part, or was that the second part?
No, the other part was about what are the realities of the numbers. 1,000 police-involved shootings that lead to a death every year. And I have this long drawn out, 3-slide piece that I do in some of these presentations. And realistically, you're talking about, in my math, and it's probably conservative, 35 million police calls for service in the country every year, and 1,000 lethal interventions. I'm not a mathematician. I don't know how many zeros behind the decimal before you get to what percentage that actually is, but it's a grain of sand. And again, it's not to minimize the loss of life, because life is sacred, but the fact that 35 million calls happen, and 1,000 times somebody has to be shot by an officer, with 80% of those people being armed. Those are the numbers that, and quite frankly, I'm not a fan of the media. If any of you are members of the media, I apologize. I'm not a fan of a lot of the current media and how they handle things. There's always been a line that you use when it talks to, especially print media. If it bleeds, it leads. If it's got blood and guts, it's going to be frontline. And that's kind of the way the media is. They pounce on some of these stories, and then they're like a squirrel. They see the next big dilemma, and they run off and take care of that. After they tore up a city and tore at the heart of the city. So that's the second part of it, Kathy, is that the math isn't the reality of what the media portrays.
Amazing questions. See, I love the questions that we are getting. So does anybody have any other questions?
Is it okay if I ask one more, Temwa?
Go for it.
My other question is in regards to training. Is there any training for like racial bias or any kind of ways? Is that also part of the training for the Dubuque Police Department?
Yeah, every city employee has to go through 3 levels of what we call intercultural competence training, and we've been doing that since 2004. And then within the department, we do annual bias training, and we have 3 different levels of communication courses that all of our officers have to go through. So besides what every other city organization, city department gets, we get 3 more, plus we get annual training.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Oh, they're just waiting for the firemen.